What is war? Hi, I'm John. Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. What is war? It's in the air. It's been in the air on Earth for a long time, pretty much for its entire existence. It's a subject I have a lot of familiarity with. For those of you who don't know, I graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point. That's what the ring is. In 1998, with a degree in philosophy and systems engineering. I graduated as a second lieutenant, and I went on to become a UH-60 Blackhawk helicopter pilot. I was also airborne and air assault qualified. And while at West Point, I was the captain of the National Championship Ethics Bowl team, among many other fine honors that I enjoyed at the academy. I was stationed in Germany as a Blackhawk pilot. I was subsequently grounded, and then I was hired to work for Brigadier General Kenneth Quinlan, who was the Chief of Staff of 5th Corps, which was the unit in charge of planning the Iraq War. And I became his executive officer, which meant that I was his right-hand man. I ran his offices. I ran his secretary, his driver, his admin people, his calendar. I went with him to all his information briefings. I was with him everywhere. I vetted all his interviews and meetings. Before people would go in and see him for decisions and briefings, they'd sit with me. And I rode with him everywhere. So we strategized and philosophized all the time. I worked for him from December of 2001, right after 9/11, to June of 2002. And I got the real world experience of what war planning is. In that position, we dealt with SHAPE and NATO and EU and the White House and the Pentagon and countries and all the Western forces. And it was a real deal. We were planning to invade Iraq. So I went through the whole process, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the subject of war philosophically is one that I lived out. So, and in that sense, one of my favorite philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, he wrote philosophically about handling great power while he was emperor. So it was fun for me, in a living laboratory sort of way, to get philosophical about war and then be at the top of the world's most powerful war machine. Quite the view. So, what is war? So, war is hostile clash of systems. I would go so far as to say war is a hostile clash of systems where the intention from at least one system is the intended destruction of the other system to forcibly align it to value systems within its own system, if not outright absorption, to grow the initial system. Now, the traditional dictionary definition of war, and the normal one people go by, is far more political. They relegate it simply to nation states with political business that become hostile towards each other. I mean, it's very narrow-minded, but that's traditional definition of war, is this political bodies committing violence towards one another, which is for sure that's one aspect of war. But war is at place in all realms, and war is a function that infinite systems engage in. Cellular level, microbiologic, biologically, cellular, molecular, anywhere where consciousness sort of comes in, a system can make a decision to be hostile towards another system and intend to do it and be aware of it. And so I think for me, when it becomes war is when the system one decides in a self-aware manner self-possessed manner to do intentional harm and destruction to another system because it has an agenda. It has things it either wants from that system. It either wants that system to not exist. It wants it to exist in a new capacity in which it has control over the value system of that system that it's going to war with, or it wants to fully absorb that system in some capacity. And so those are really just the options that the system has when it decides to go to war. It doesn't matter which one it picks. Once it crosses that line, it's at war. It can go it just because if it wants to just destroy the system or keep parts of it or just lightly destroy it, like, you know, one of the things in war is that a more political version is that you can conduct a war kind of without the other side knowing. That's sort of the optimum outcome. I think that's what Sun Tzu basically, you can sum up Chinese war theology. I mean, they don't have a god, so I guess, the states that are god, so war is one of their theologies. Basically, if you can find a way to conduct an entire war without being found out, and you can win the war, and the other side didn't even know they were combatants in it, and that's sort of their most desirable mode of war. Let's see if it's too bright now. Yeah, it's still too bright. Sorry, guys. So that's sort of like their optimum version of war. But just because the other party's not conscious to it doesn't mean it's not war, because the other side's doing intentional harm and damage to manipulate the stasis of that particular system to a level that they think it would be more comfortable with or that it wants. Okay, so that, to me, that's what war is. I don't think it's that complicated. War is chaotic and filled with untenable energies that make it difficult for analysis. So I think when it comes to war, that's part of the difficulty for people. It's not that the concept of it is too difficult. It's a pretty simple concept, actually. And then philosophically, people look to philosophers to say, well, they want an excuse for war. Basically, they want a moral absolution almost for war from philosophers. Like, when I was at West Point during my senior year, in order to get like your proper major, you had to do a senior thesis, and it was like a mini PhD. You had to use the semester to write your paper and then essentially submit it to a thesis defense board and then go in and defend it. So first semester, I submitted the paper I wanted to do, which was I wanted to disprove just war theory, and they wouldn't let me do it. They declined it, and they let somebody do like the the environmental ethics of rock climbing and littering. Yeah, I was like, okay, you're not gonna let me take a swing at just war theory. That's ridiculous. This is West Point. This is the place to do it. It's not like I would have got it if I was at like CSUN. No offense, CSUN, but at West Point, you should be happy when a cadet says, "Hey, I want to take a swing at the biggest ethical question in the business." They were not. Um, so, because obviously, I don't think that there is an excuse for war. I don't think there's ever moral justification for war, because the way I view war is that System 1 is instigating a hostile or an intentional hostility towards System 2. And what people are really asking with just war is, for most people, they're saying, well, if that happens, is System 2, can they respond with lethality and it be ethical? It can still be moral. And yes, I believe that, because I don't believe System 2's response to System 1 stepping out of moral bounds and out of ethical reign. I don't think System 2 is engaged in war when it responds. I think they're engaged in defense and repulsion, and they are allowed all manner of proportional response, and they are allowed to attempt to maintain the integrity of their system. And I think that's all moral and ethical. what they're really saying in the modern day is that they want a moral excuse to basically they want a moral excuse to basically have a weapons bazaar. They're not interested in an actual philosophical analysis. And that's what I found out when I was up at the when I was up on war staff. I mean, war is just global business. And so ethics and morality, in fact, at that level, they identify ethics and morality as chinks in the armor. They identify those as weaknesses. They identify those as loopholes to be exploited to gain tactical, operational, and strategic advantage. And they only really use ethics and morals as a crippling agent to people who have some morality left when they enter into war. Because those people, and they're the professionals at war, they know the truth about morality and ethics vis-a-vis war. And that is once you step onto the fields of war and the war these guys are having a learning moment. As far as the war professionals go, they know the dirty secret of war philosophically, and that is they don't care. And that is that it doesn't exist in war. Because war is not dancing. War does not take two to tango. In fact, war only takes like one to do it. And so that's another part of sort of the false philosophy that they give people in regards to war, is they try to convince people, like the prevailing intellectual wind on war is that it's like no fault divorce. Let's rewind that. They want to convince everybody that if they can say that it's a war, then both countries are equally culpable in some way, or that, like, at least if not equally culpable, that they're both in a war, right? And then it just doesn't like necessarily matter at that point. Then it's just about war, and everybody knows about war, and that's how they act, because they instigate. When System 1 instigates their war, they've already abdicated any morality or ethics. That's the thing. So when System 2, they try to hold System 2 to ethics and morality so that they can have advantages over them, because System 1 has already initiated a no morality zone by engaging in war in the first place. And they're trying usually to spread propaganda that System 2 is also now at war, when in fact System 2 may in fact not actually be at war. They're being forced to participate in System 1's war and aggression, and they're attempting to repulse. And from the outside, it can look like, oh, they're in a war. And by a terrestrial, Earth, human, politically motivated definition, they are in a war. But in philosophical reality, System 2 is simply trying to return to its stasis before System 1 broke moral and ethical boundaries to do bad. In System 1, it doesn't matter if it's human political war, or if it's cancer cells or aggressive forms of life. They've put themselves into a mode of life that is in disharmony with the reality that it's in. Now, I understand that the reality resolves everything, and that the all-pervading consciousness, some say God, I certainly do, but the all-pervading consciousness, the fabric of time-space, which has reflexive properties, proven to have reflexive properties, and definitely emanates off of moral and ethical decisions, even though it can resolve and has a place for every type of activity that exists, that does not backwards justify bad, unethical, and evil behavior. Just because the universe is going to resolve things And just because it can make a function out of anything doesn't give you any moral relief. It doesn't give you any ethical or moral relief to do those things. And so when System 1 initiates hostilities to do damage or harm in order to obtain a self-centered outcome from another system, they assume sole moral and ethical responsibility for everything that springs out of it, including if they are forcing System 2 to respond in kind, then they assume all moral and ethical responsibilities for what they have produced. So in this case, moral and ethical propagation of bad, evil, and incorrect decision making philosophically, anything that's beget from that is culpable morally and ethically by System 1. And so System 2 is not even at war. System 1 is essentially at war with itself. Because invariably, when System 1 can engage in some sort of self-healing or self-analysis or evolution to change the things about it doesn't like, even if those things are cited as like resource scarcity or other things that are basically illusions and probably hard focus evolutionary things that are trying to get them to discover and innovate and move into other areas of life, they don't. And so they're just at war with themselves because it's arbitrary whichever other system they go after, because they're just trying to find the things in the other system that are going to make them feel better. So it's essentially irrelevant which other system it is. It's just a matter of, is it convenient to do it? Does it have most of the things that it wants? Now there are some times when more conscious beings get together, they do make it personal, and that's even worse. Because then to get to descend to those levels of masochism, like the very levels of life that you have to get to through consciously doing unethical things and like consciously having ethics that you've consciously created to invert your ethical journey. So essentially a descent into evil. You can't even access some of these descended value systems unless you've been trying to do it for a long time and you've practiced it. And so if you get to that level and you've decided, and those people decide to engage in war where they're masochistic and sadistic, and they are doing it because now they actually need these ill-gotten energies to be produced for them to thrive, and they've essentially turned System 1 into nothing but a war cell, a war machine, no different than cancer. Well, all it does is beget more war and death. And then in real life, they're trying to typically sever moral and ethical culpability for that so that it doesn't look like them. But really, it's just them spreading themselves around while they go to war with themselves and just lash out. So that's why I say war is not between two parties. War is one party that decides to go to war with anything else. So anything else it drags into it has a right to defend itself and to repulse it and to regain its stasis. And that's just the nature of the universe. Like inertia, stasis, equilibrium. That's why everything resolves. And once again, gives no one an ability to back engineer that and say, well, it'll take care of itself, so I can do this. That's incorrect logic. And trust me, you guys aren't even ready for nonlinear ethics. Some of you are, but obviously in a planet that has 10,000 continuous years of wars for profit, unending, with the same overseers. I mean, you're not ready for that. Anyway, so kind of sum it up. War. A system decides it's just going to start doing harm and destruction to other systems for its own gain, essentially, and relieving itself of its conscious and shadow work and in it like responsibilities to do things is like, yeah, trust me, it's the main driver of why they do it. And the political sort of human definition of it is real narrow. But even in there, once you decide to do it, you're deciding to be unethical. That's the point. And just because they drag other people into it doesn't make them unethical because you've forced a lack of ethics on them. If you drag people to hell, you can't blame them that they're in hell. Or if you build hell and make people live in it, you can't judge them for what they do to try to get out of hell. Like, all bets are off. Like, there you go, and there you have it. Well, I learned a lot up there, and philosophy does cover it. War, I advise against it, and now you know where I stand on it, politically, ethically, morally. Obviously, think for yourself, get deep into it, and I wish you the best. And love is the answer.